Serious Redditors who killed someone. What happened? Attention. Serious tag notice jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted. Link. Reddit. com/r/askreddit/wiki/index/wiki_rule 6. In any comment, parent or child, parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour, and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an AMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I'm a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit /message/compose/to/r/askreddit if you have any questions or concerns. A guy attacked me at 3 a.m. while I was walking to work, literally barreled out of the woods and tackled me onto concrete with his belt undone. He broke 3 of my ribs. I tried to choke him long enough to render him unconscious, and I did. He never woke up. It still bothers me. I was arrested and questioned in the hospital, uncuffed the following morning after the police obtained security camera footage. I've been asked before how I managed to hold the choke long enough to kill him. I don't know. I may have crushed his windpipe. I have no concept of how long the choke, or even the whole situation, lasted. Humans have an instinct called hysterical strength. As someone else said, we don't really use this unless it's a dire life or death situation due to the fact that this will destroy our body. But in the case of life or death, the body doesn't really matter as long as you survive. Wasn't there a case of this when a woman literally lifted a car to save her kids and tearing the muscles in her arms in the process? My husband and I only had one car at the time, and I had to ride with him to work one morning around 4 a.m. so I could drive back home. It was raining, and the road wasn't lit. We were just chatting with one another, and I was reaching for the CD album for some tunes. I looked up for a moment and thought I saw what looked like a crumpled up blanket or trash bag or something in the road, but I couldn't make it out at all. My husband was driving and couldn't see it at all. Neither of us got to see for sure what it was until the headlights got close enough, and by then it was too late to react. It was a man, curled up in a ball in the middle of the road, dressed completely in black clothing. I remember crying out just a half second before we struck him and went over him. It hasn't even dawned on my husband what had just happened, and I was screaming and crying in horror. My husband was also very distraught and was shaking. I told him he has to call 911 and get help, so he did. He got out of the car and went over to check on the man and see if he was responsive at all. Nothing. The ambulance and cops came. They asked us a bunch of questions and the whole routine. The news crews came out to film everything. That man died on the way to the hospital. This haunted me for over a year after it happened. A month or so later we found out that the man had abandoned his truck at a nearby gas station and walked away. He wasn't from the area either. We learned that 2 of his friends came down here to talk to him and tried to get him to go back home with them and get back into rehab, but he had refused and said he wasn't coming back. There was a lot of alcohol and meth in his system. I don't know what that does to a person when those things are mixed, but somehow this guy found his way into the middle of a poorly lit city street and curled himself up. He'll never know why he was there. I'm still afraid of driving on rainy nights. I don't think I slept well at all for a while afterwards. I have to travel that same road to work, and now I always think about it when I pass that spot on the road. It really sounds like he was trying to kill himself. All the details in your story point to that being the most probable reason he was in that situation. And as much as I have sympathy for whatever struggles he may have been dealing with, putting that kind of burden and trauma on a random, innocent person is a truly selfish thing to do. It's a tragedy, but you should not feel guilty for what happened. It wasn't your fault in the slightest bit. The police officer also said this. He believed this was a suicide and we were the unsuspecting participants. I was angry at this guy for doing this to us, to his parents and his friends that were trying to save him. But I've also been in a place where I wanted my life to just be over with. So I felt for him as much as I was angry with him. I guess if there was anything positive about it, he didn't have any kids or a wife. My ex-husband committed suicide just a few months after this, leaving behind 3 children. That did major damage to my children. That was just a rough year. I was working as a cleaner at an aged care. Resident with severe dementia was sleeping. I decided to mop the floor in her room while she was asleep. Resident woke up and decided to get out of bed without assistance. Resident slipped on wet floor. Carers found her unconscious and called ambulance. Resident died at the scene. Nothing came of it as Resident had no living relatives. I got told it was the carer's fault for not keeping a close eye on Resident. But I blame myself. I still think about this late at night. The floor could have been completely dry and that Resident still could slip in it in stockings or bare feet. Not your fault by a mile. I'm an RN. Falls kill all the time and the only people responsible are the caregivers who failed to keep them safe. Thank you for your comment. It gives me comfort. Unfortunately, death is something that's a part of aged care work. This hits closer to home. Having someone's death be the result of my actions. Sometimes I can't help thinking, if I did things differently that day she would have lived longer. Thoughts such as if I cleaned at a different time, or if I stayed in her room longer. She fell less than 10 minutes after I finished. I do not blame the caregivers at all as they were very busy and had no way of knowing she would get out of bed when she did. Indirectly, forgive any format issues. I'm on mobile. 11 years ago, my best friend and I started using crack. The addiction hit us hard. For 10 months straight we were basically driving our families bankrupt with very hard and constant usage. One night, Mike was unable to sleep. He tells me he hadn't been able to sleep for a week at that point. I told him I'd cut him off for a few days, as I was the one still managing to find money to get any. But then the night before he died, I went back on e-word and gave him some. He used very little. I used my stash and ran out. The next day I had to leave to pick up some furniture for my grandma. He said he was feeling sick, so he stayed behind. On the way to where I needed to go, I stopped and got more crack. Picked up the furniture and went home. Whole trip took about 42 minutes. I was counting the time cause I had a short window to be out in the first place for reasons that are not important. I come home and call out to Mike. He didn't answer, so I assumed he was upstairs. My room was on the first floor, while the rest of the house was on the second, and so decided to drop off Grandma's furniture before going back to my room. I enter my room and I don't see him immediately. Then I spot his legs sticking out behind the bed. He was out cold between the wall and bed, dying from an overdose. I pulled him out from there and then shouted at mother to call 911. Cops came first. Ambulance about 45 minutes later. They picked him up, loaded him into the ambulance, and took him to the hospital. His mother came rushing to my house right before they took him. I got in my car and drove behind them. I told the doctors and everyone what was going on. Didn't care about my legal safety. Just told him it's probably the crack. About an hour later I went home. 2 hours later his mother calls me to tell me he had slipped straight into a coma. 1 hour later, she calls again to tell me he had died. I tried to kill myself that night by smoking everything I acquired while I was out, all in a single sitting. I clearly survived. I've been clean since. I miss him dearly and will never forgive myself for what happened. Quick edit. Jeebus didn't expect so much attention from this post. Thanks all who have left kind, encouraging words. Don't blame yourself. I've been in that position before. If we don't get what we want from one person, well, go to the next. I've been clean for almost 17 years. Glad you're still here. Congrats on your sobriety. Edit. Thank you kind stranger for my very first silver. A childhood friend suffered liver failure and was on a breathing machine. When she breathed her last, her father could not bring himself to turn off the breathing apparatus. So, I did. And then the men from the funeral home came. They were very polite, and we gave them all the info they needed for them to do their job. Her stepmother stayed at the house, while I took her dad out for ice cream, just to be away from the scene. It was a warm summer night, and we walked and talked, and had ice cream at the local Sweet Frog. You may think that might not qualify, but there is a moment of finality when you switch off a friend's oxygen machine. About 6 months after, I was visiting a friend, recounting the story, and suddenly the dam burst and I cried for hours. Damn. At least you could give them a peaceful death than they could have suffered. 2 men broke into my house late at night. I shot them. 1 died. Sorry you had to go through that. Thank you. I don't feel guilty, but it's hard to put something like that behind you. I guess this technically counts. I was an EMT out in the field my first week after license qualification. During those initial weeks, you have to ride as a third with a training officer until they sign off that you're competent. We get a call to a hospice facility, patient unconscious and unresponsive. Note that this isn't just a regular nursing home. This is the final stop for people who don't have long left and are being made as comfortable as possible. We are advised that paramedics are also responding, which is standard for any calls involving altered consciousness. As we are on the way, Mita tells me that this particular facility is a regular customer for this particular call. If a patient dies at the facility, they have to jump through a bunch of regulatory hoops and the paperwork is annoying, so they call 911 before the patient dies, dumping the problem on the hospital. We get there first, talk to the staff, get led into the patient room. The nurse tells us that the patient has been on his way out for a while, that this was expected. He, heartbreakingly, has no friends or family and has a DNR, a do not resuscitate order. They admit they don't expect him to wake up. Mita gets on the radio and cancels the medics, telling them we are transporting to the ER. First mistake. A DNR means do not resuscitate //, which means if your heart stops or you stop breathing, do not try to restart them. It does not mean do not treat. The patient was owed a full and comprehensive attempt to restore consciousness. Think of it this way, if a DNR patient gets stabbed, we wouldn't have just sat there and watched him bleed out. We load the patient onto the bus and head to the ER code 1. No lights or sirens. I'm sat in the back with the patient, eyes glued to his chest watching his breathing. I had an uneasy feeling about the whole situation. We'd been told he was already circling the drain, and something felt wrong. We pull up to the ambulance bay. I open the doors and release the cot from the clamps, pulling the patient out. Here's a second mistake. The cots we had trained on were the type that loaded onto the bus by swinging the support frame 90 degrees along the length of the cot. When you load it, you put the front wheels by the head onto the ambulance floor, pull a release lever and just push. The main frame pivots up and locks into place. This one was older. You have to put the front wheels on, pull the release, then have your partner manually lift the collapsing frame up like a scissor lift. So as I pull the cot halfway out, I hit the frame release, expecting the pivot to smoothly come down as the cot clears the rear bumper. Instead, the frame waits until the whole thing has cleared the floor, so only the loading wheels by the head have contact, and it plummets. Wham! I hadn't dropped the patient, but the whole cot shook violently as the wheels slammed into place. The two is laughing at the rookie mistake. I'm horribly embarrassed. They close the doors. We wheel into the ER and then on to goes to find the triage nurse to get a bay assignment. It's at that point I look more closely at the patient, who isn't breathing anymore. That means we don't wait for the nurse. We just let ourselves in, which we do. Finally moving in a hurry, everyone scrambles. Doctor sends on the bay. We wave the DNR paperwork at him and report. He looks at the paperwork, looks at the patient, looks at us, and asks why did you cancel the medics? It was 99% likely I'd stop the patient's heart with the rookie jolt of the cot, causing the DNR to take effect. If I'd unloaded the right way, he would have still been breathing by the time the ER took over, and they would have likely revived him. As a rookie on my first week, I just had a nasty note added to my file, but Mita wasn't at it for a good long while after that, and we all got a very in-depth refresher course on what exactly a DNR does and does not cover. In our document, we likely would not have revived him if the patient was fragile enough to die just by being jostled on a stretcher. Then he would have also died while you guys moved him from the stretcher to the hospital bed, or while we aggressively undressed him, or literally any number of things that would upset his equilibrium. like establishing access, sternal rubs, etc. EMT on the bus and the addition. I was helping a nurse change a patient with cancer everywhere, pleural effusions, and a bunch of other issues. DNR. Rolled her on her side facing me, and she starts fighting me. I'm comforting her and watching her O2, which is still 100%. Telling her we're almost done. Another 20 seconds, and she grabs my right boob. We roll her on her back, and she's blue. Called the doc, called the family in, and she died within the hour. I've heard a lot of ICU and LTC nurses say they often give a suffering DNR patient one last bath because the turning is usually enough to send them over the rainbow bridge. And it's true that she would have suffered so much more with all the treatment we were giving her had she not died. But I still felt awful that I essentially killed a woman with my boob. I didn't kill someone, but my aunt and her husband did. They were camping and asleep in their tent. In the middle of the night, some strange man slipped into the tent and got on top of her. She woke up and started screaming. So her husband grabbed his gun and shot the guy. They both immediately ran out and went to tell the man running the campground what had happened. By the time police got there and checked the tent, he was dead. Apparently the guy they killed had been arrested exactly a year prior for breaking into a tent full of kids at some other campground. Creepy man. I'm glad your uncle was able to save her. Yeah, me too. Friend of mine was outside of a bar waiting for a ride home. It wasn't that late at night and he texted me. I drove about 10 minutes to go get him. When I arrived, there were 3 other guys surrounding him, obviously wanting trouble. I ran and tackled one of the guys to the floor. I was completely focused on this guy because he was literally face to face with my friend. We start hitting each other and a bystander helped with the other 2 men. I managed to stumble back on my feet and kicked the guy in the face. He hit his head against the wall of the building and I knew it wasn't a good sound. With my adrenaline rushing, I looked over and the other 2 men were running away. I was the one to call the cops and report everything. I can only imagine how that sound of his skull cracking stays in your head. God, when his head broke, my heart skipped 2 beats. I killed my sister's unborn baby. We were teenagers and playing softball. I didn't know she was pregnant, and I hit a line drive she pitched to me. It hit her right in the abdomen. That is awful. I can't imagine how you must have felt. I hope you don't blame yourself. It's pretty ducked up. One friend was there when it happened, and knew about it, and I recently told my boyfriend about it. Other than that, I don't talk about it. I'm in a bad place today and just started answering shit on Reddit. My 82-year-old grandma asked to stay in our home. When her health started failing her, we were more than happy to oblige. Being 16 and with night classes, I was usually up all night until morning playing video games. Since she wasn't comfortable having a private nurse, we were pretty much her caretakers. I also volunteered to keep an eye on her in case she needed some help or something, while everyone else was asleep. We were extremely close growing up, so I obviously had a great time. I put a buzzer beside her bed, so she didn't have to strain herself calling out to me in case I wasn't by her bedside playing Pokemon Emerald. We'd talk until she fell asleep. I learned a lot about her, my aunts, my uncles, my mom, and my grandpa during those few short weeks. However, one night, I was feeling very tired, so I decided to go to sleep on the chair and jokingly told her to hit me with her cane in case I didn't wake up from the buzzer. I can still remember how she got up on her own that night and covered me with her extra blanket. I told her I loved her and she gave me a kiss in the forehead. I got cozy and dozed off. Little did I know that before she could get back on her bed, she'd lose her balance, fall, and lose consciousness. I can still remember my mother screaming and crying her heart out that night. My grandma died couple of days later. Everyone tried to comfort me the best that they could. They said that she cold died in a time. My mom, in particular, said I was blessed to have such a good last memory of her. Still, I can't help but blame myself knowing that she cold still lived a couple of months, if not a few years more, had I not decided to go to sleep. I'm sorry you had to go through that. There's probably nothing I can say that others haven't already, but it sounds like you made her last weeks as comfortable as they possibly could have been. didn't kill her, but I feel a lot of guilt because I didn't help when I could have. 2 years ago during the spring break of my senior year, an old friend of mine killed herself. When we were in 7th grade, that was around the time my depression had started, and she was the closest thing I had to a friend. She was the person who helped me get through that rough patch in my life. She helped me in one of my darkest times, but I didn't help her. I knew she had suicidal thoughts, but I never reached out to help. I have nightmares about her almost every night. I'm so sorry I didn't help you, Erica. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.